Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at the CZ factory in Uherský Brod in the Czech Republic by the generous invitation of CZ to take a look at some of the cool firearms that they have here. Today, we're taking a look at one of the newest and best of CZ's current production rifles. This is the Bren 2. So we previously looked at the original CZ Bren, the Bren 805. And if you haven't seen that video, it's probably worth going back and checking that one out to have some context for where the Bren 2 came from. So this project was in development in 2015. It was launched officially in 2016. And the idea was to rectify a bunch of the complaints with the original Bren 805. Now, some of the issues with the 805 were specifically features that had been requested by the Czech military, and CZ, having gotten the contract for Czech military rifles, figured now they have the opportunity to make what they know are improvements to the gun and be able to market them to the military in a much more easily than trying to change the original tender requirements during the contracting period. So this is also being set up for export to, well, as many other countries as CZ can manage to sell it to, because it is very much for the national military and also for export sale. So fundamentally, probably the biggest thing that the Bren 2 does is it shaves more than a pound, about 1.5 pounds off the weight of the gun. So the original 805 weighed in at like 3.5, 3.6 kilograms, or about 9 pounds, or about 8 pounds. This comes in at 2.5 to 2.6 to 2.9 kilos or so, depending on the barrel length and the caliber, which is more like 6.5 pounds. So substantial weight reduction. They also improved a lot of the controls. They improved pretty much every aspect of the rifle, either in a subtle way or in a fairly significant way. So let's take a look at the Bren 2 and see how it changed from the original 805. So there are a couple really obvious visual changes, mostly the stock, but really every element of this rifle changed. So let's start at the back and go through the whole thing. The 805 here had a telescoping and folding stock, as does the Bren 2, but the 805's is really kind of complicated. It's got a lot of fiddly bits on it, and most interestingly, it actually has this extra redundant component to it. So you've got a block in the receiver, and then you've got like an adapter block, and then you've got the stock itself. With the Bren 2, they've simplified that significantly and gotten rid of the middleman, you might say. So now we have the hinge block here is the component that is blocked into the receiver. At the same time, that meant they were able to get rid of the second disassembly pin because it's simply not necessary. The stock is dovetailed vertically here into the receiver. There's no need for a pin to hold it in place. On the original 805, the lower receiver is polymer, and it's really actually fairly large and bulky. And they significantly reduced that by redesigning it. So we have the same basic structure here, but it's a lot less bulky. They've shaved a lot of volume off of it. Not a ton of weight savings here because it is polymer instead of, well, aluminum. But it is a much slimmer design, which is nice. The controls have been made very much AR-15-like. So we have an AR-15 style bolt lock and paddle release. The left-hand magazine release has been made rather more ergonomic. Instead of being an extra button up here, it is a lever down at the bottom. Nice and easy to operate. The selector lever on the Bren 2 is rather smaller than on the 805, and we have 3 positions: safe, semi, and full. Pretty simple, and completely ambidextrous. And they actually added another bolt lock control. So inside the trigger guard here, we have a lever that can be pressed up or down. And that allows you to lock the bolt in the rearward position by pushing this up, and release the bolt by pushing it down. Now, it's kind of funny that the original 805 had no controls to do this. You just had to yank back on the charging handle, and the Bren 2 has like doubled down on it with both this one and this one. But the rationale here is that they wanted to design this, the Bren 2, for inclusion in potential military trials that specified completely ambidextrous controls. And at the same time, they also wanted to have this paddle. So they put them both in, and you know, why not? Now, we'll come back to the magazine well in a minute, but the Bren 2 was made available in both 5.56 and 7.62 by 39. This is a Stanag pattern of magazine well, so it doesn't use AK magazines. It instead uses CZ's own proprietary 7.62 by 39 magazine, which is right here. Now, this is actually technically an 807 magazine, which is the 807 was the development platform for 7.62 by 39 in the Bren. The Bren 2s sold in 7.62 use a black polymer magazine instead of the translucent, sort of bluish there. But you can see the similarity here. These both fit a straight Stanag type magazine well. The pistol grip shape has been changed. It looks a little more traditional in the Bren 2. They both still have the removable back straps, and neither of them, like the Bren 2, still does not have any alternates for the back strap. It's removable, but that's your one option. And they did add storage in the bottom of the pistol grip. So you've got a little container there for batteries or whatever you want to put in there. Moving forward, we have a charging handle which can be installed on either side, so again, completely ambidextrous, and it is now a non-reciprocating charging handle. The reciprocating handle was one of the complaints of the Bren 805, and they have a really clever system in this where it can actually be used as to push the bolt forward, but when it's in the forward position, the charging handle disconnects from the bolt, and so it does not cycle backwards. So we'll take a closer look at that when we disassemble the rifle. Out at the front end here, the gas piston assembly has been completely rebuilt, and the plug has been made quite a bit easier to work with. So the original 805, you had to depress this little spring plunger in order to adjust the gas plug from its one position to the other, and you kind of had to use a tool or you had to get a grasp on this. It was not the most ergonomic thing to use. On the Bren 2, there's now this big flag up here that allows you to very easily just select this from standard operation to harsh condition to completely cut off. And you still have a big hole in it so that if the gun is really hot, you can use a cartridge or basically any other ad hoc tool to stick through there to get you some leverage to change it. The muzzle device went from being a fancy, expensive compensator to just frankly a simple and much more functional and less obnoxious to everybody around you flash hider. Now, the very first pattern of this had 3 straight tines, and it was found that it actually kind of had this harmonic ring when you fired, and so they redesigned it a bit by giving it this twist that gets rid of the ringing noise. I don't know that that's really that much of a problem, but apparently it was obnoxious to some people. This is also set up standard to fit the Brugger and Tomet Rotex 5 suppressors. And you may have seen it already, but current purchase of these guns for the Czech military include Aimpoint Comp M5s. The original 805s were purchased with a Miopta red dot optic that is frankly heavier, bulkier, and well, really bulkier. It's quite a wide red dot. Something that is a lot less convenient to use than the Aimpoint Comp M4. On the Bren 805, the iron sights provided were actually outsourced to Troy Manufacturing in the US. For the Bren 2, CZ brought that manufacturing in-house. It's still essentially the same pattern of sight. So there are 2 apertures. You've got a large ghost ring aperture there, and you've also got a fine precision aperture. And the adjustments on this are actually finer. The click adjustments are finer than on the original Troy, the early Troy sights. So that's the rear, and that is the front sight. They're both flip up / flip down. Now for disassembly, we have a very nice simple system. We've got one pin here in the front. We're going to push that through, and the official tool for doing that is a magazine. I'm just going to use the front corner of the magazine to pop that through. This is a captive pin, so I can snap it out like that, and then the lower receiver lifts off from the front and completely out. I then open up the stock, press this lever, and I can slide the stock assembly out of the gun. Note, of course, this does telescope as well as fold to the side. Now, I can actually drop the bolt carrier out of the gun without messing with the charging handle, because what we have here is an extra component right in the top. So let me pull this out, bring it back to there. So the way this works is the charging handle sits in this slot, and when the bolt is somewhere in its travel, this little hook right here locks into this notch in the front of the bolt carrier. So the two are locked together. By the way, this is polymer. The bolt carrier is steel, of course, but this is just a very lightweight polymer. Now, when the bolt is all the way forward in battery, it runs into the back of the barrel trunnion, and that pushes this lever up, which lifts that hook up and out of the way, thus leaving the bolt carrier unattached. So when this is all the way forward and you fire the rifle, the bolt carrier is going to cycle and the charging handle is going to stay in place. But if you grab the charging handle and pull it back, as soon as you clear the front trunnion, that lever is going to snap down, and now the two are locked together, and you can use the handle to both pull the bolt back and to push it forward. Now, unlike the Bren 805, the Bren 2 bolt carrier assembly is disassemblable in the field. So we just pop this pin out. I would normally do that with a cartridge, but I don't have one here, so I'll use my universal disassembly tool instead. There is a little rubber gasket right here that just gives this a little bit of tension to hold it in place in the bolt carrier. Of course, when it's installed in the gun, it can't come out because there's no space for it to move. We have a lever here that holds the firing pin in, so we can pop that out. There's our firing pin. And then this is very AR-18-ish. The fundamental core mechanics of the rifle did not change from the 805 to the Bren 2. We now have our bolt. Notice the bolt here is actually a little bit chunkier at the front than the 805. A little bit more mass, a little bit stronger. And 6 lugs actually instead of 7. Notice that the bolt has this little reinforced band. It's a little heavier duty up front. And that is, I think, largely to support the larger breech face of the 7.62x39 version, so that they can use the same diameter, the same hole here, same bolt carrier, and some of the same tooling for 5.56 versus 7.62x39 bolts. One interesting extra feature we have here that is unique to the full auto carriers are these two cylinders. Those are actually tubes, and they are anti-bounce weights. So there are a pair of springs up here in the front, so that when the bolt comes fully into battery and hits, it has a tendency to bounce open, which can cause malfunctions or, in the worst case, out of battery discharges if a gun's not designed right. And the way that this can be avoided is by having a counterweight up here, where when the bolt wants to bounce open, you have these two weights that immediately start moving forward that prevent it from bouncing and just stay where it is. So these are not in the civilian semi-auto versions, because in semi-auto, bolt bounce simply isn't a problem, because you can't pull the trigger fast enough to duplicate full auto, where it can become an issue. Next up, I mentioned that this is available in both 5.56 and 7.62, and they actually have kits for barrel change. For example, Egypt purchased these, and they purchased them as guns in one caliber, as well as getting the conversion assembly to use the other caliber. So to make that change, what you do is take out the 6 hex screws. There's 3 on this side rail, and 3 on the other. So there's one of them. And there's the other side. Those 6 screws lock the barrel into the receiver. And so now we can pull the entire barrel assembly out of the gun. And that is going to slide nicely out. So here we have the whole gas piston assembly. So when you fire, gas comes in here. It's going to push this back, and that is going to push on the bolt carrier, which sits right there. This, by the way, is the 11-inch barrel. In 5.56, they make this in 8, 11, and 14 inches, and in 7.62 by 39, they make it in 9, 11, and 14 inches. So to change calibers, you would need to change this, change your bolt, of course, and then change your magazine. And you'd think that's going to be difficult because this is this whole molded polymer. Well, there's actually an insert. This is a 7.62 by 39 magazine well by default with a 5.56 insert in it. So to take that out, we're going to push the magazine well in. We're just going to squeeze this together. Here we go. There we go. So there's our insert. With this in place, you've got a 5.56 caliber, and with it out, you have 7.62 by 39. Well, really a pretty slick system. So you also, of course, have to change the bolt and the firing pin. And then the one other difference that is actually done is to change the hammer spring, because it's assumed that if you're using 7.62 by 39 in a military context, you're probably using some old comblock style surplus ammunition, which tends to have hard primers. And so they have a heavier hammer spring for 7.62 by 39. Not technically required to actually function in the caliber, but a good idea for the ammunition that people are typically going to be using. If we compare the 2 fire control groups, one from the 805 here and one from the Bren 2, you can see that the fire control system has been significantly changed. Actually, a lot of the parts have been made smaller and lighter in the Bren 2. What was originally an AK style hammer spring has been changed to a long compression spring here. The 2-round burst mechanism is gone because, frankly, 2-round burst is a dumb idea, and I don't think CZ would have done it in the first place were it not specifically a requirement from the Czech army at the time. So the hammer is a little bit smaller. None of these parts interchange, and there's actually a remarkably noticeable weight difference with the 805 lower assembly really actually being quite a bit heavier than the Bren 2. And that leaves us with just a bare receiver here. Well, bare receiver with Aimpoint Comp M4 on it. Our markings are CZ Bren 2, made in Czech Republic. And on this side, we have a 2016 proof date. SHE is still the factory code for Uherský Brod, 2016. The cross swords of the Czech military acceptance, and a serial number. And you can see on the inside here, there are a fair number of features in there, but this would all be a pretty easy thing to machine from the top like this, especially given that it's made out of aluminum. And there's the whole thing. There is a CZ Bren 2 fully field stripped. The magazine well for the 5.56 caliber Bren 2 is normal Stanag, takes all regular AR pattern magazines. However, the Czech military uses one that is made by CZ. So this really doesn't do anything different than a typical magazine. It does have a window at the back, and you can see there's that white line there that will tell you your capacity. It's marked 5, 15, and 25. So when it's totally full, the line's down at the bottom. When it's totally empty, you can't see it, but when it's totally empty, you can, there's no cartridges in it. Anyway, you do have a witness window there on the back. Other than that, this is just a normal AR pattern magazine. The Bren 2 has actually also had more success on the export sales market than the original 805. It's been adopted by a number of countries. Of course, the Czech military has adopted it, and the Czechs are acquiring new Bren 2s, and they're sending the 805s like to the active reserve. So they're not getting rid of the old guns, but they are moving them away from the frontline military units. And basically, they're going to re-equip the active duty military with all Bren 2s. The Hungarian military also decided to adopt the Bren 2 as its standard infantry rifle. They got some of the 308 BRs as well, but the primary rifle for the Hungarian military is the Bren 2. And then there have been a whole bunch of sales to police and SWAT and specific units of a whole bunch of other governments. Portugal, well, actually probably the best known one is France, where the French GIGN bought a number of Bren 2s in 7.62 by 39 because they were looking for a 7.62 by 39. Well, they were looking for a rifle that was suppressor friendly, but a bit more with a bit more power than a 5.56. Something that was suppressor friendly and capable of firing a powerful subsonic. And rather than 300 blackout, they went with 7.62 by 39, which makes the Bren 2 kind of an obvious choice for them. At any rate, this particular example is actually a Czech military pattern rifle. We do see these exported to the US as civilian semi-auto rifles as well, but I thought it would be really cool to give you guys a look at the actual standard military pattern of the Bren 2. Hopefully this has been an interesting video. Hopefully we kind of enlightened the difference between the original 805s and the Bren 2s, which I don't think is all that well understood in the US. So a big thanks to CZ for giving me access to cool stuff like this to film for you guys. Check out the description text for links to all of their social media, where you can see things like this and some really old, cool, forgotten weapons as well. Thanks for watching.